The morning the realtor put the sign outside my condo, my son looked at me like I had betrayed him. Not disappointed, not confused, betrayed. I was standing on the front walk with my purse strap folded between both hands, watching the young man from the real estate office press the metal frame into the narrow strip of grass beside the sidewalk. The sign was clean and bright, with my unit number printed neatly underneath. Behind me, the lake was still grey from the morning fog, and the balcony Paul had loved sat quiet above us. That balcony had been my place for 5 years after my husband died. Coffee before sunrise, library books in the afternoon. A little pot of rosemary I never could keep alive more than one season. It was not a mansion. It was not some grand estate. But it was mine. More than that, it was the last place Paul had chosen for me. Then Darren's SUV turned into the lot. His wife, Kelsey, was in the passenger seat. She saw the sign first. Her mouth opened a little, and she put one hand on Darren's arm before he even parked. Darren stepped out fast, the way he used to when he was a boy, and thought anger could get ahead of consequences. "Mom," he said, staring at the sign. "What did you do?" I looked at him for a moment. My only child, 46 years old, tall like his father, but with none of Paul's patience in that moment. Kelsey got out slowly, her eyes moving from the sign to me and back again, as if she were trying to read a contract from across the parking lot. I did not raise my voice. I did not explain myself there on the sidewalk for the neighbors to hear. I only said, I heard enough to know what I was not supposed to hear. Darren blinked like I had slapped him. But I hadn't slapped anyone. I had not shouted. I had not even cried in front of them. I had done my crying 2 weeks earlier, after Sunday brunch, when I heard my son tell his wife that I only needed to feel like losing my home had been my idea. That Sunday brunch had started like so many others in my condo. Quiet music from the little radio on the counter. Bacon staying warm in the oven. A bowl of strawberries by the sink. The smell of coffee filling the kitchen before anyone bothered to say thank you for it. Darren had brought Kelsey and their daughter Lily just after 10. Lily was 16 then, tall and gentle, with the kind of eyes that noticed more than adults gave her credit for. She kissed my cheek and asked if she could help set the table. Kelsey walked in behind her, carrying nothing but her phone and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Still keeping this place so warm, Marian," she said, slipping off her coat. "You must run the heat all day." I smiled and said, "Only when I have company." That was the sort of answer older women learn to give. Soft enough not to start trouble, clear enough to keep a little dignity. I was slicing strawberries when I heard Kelsey's shoes move from the dining area into the living room. Then came the little metallic snap of a tape measure. At first, I thought I had imagined it. Then she said, "If we took that wall unit out, our sectional would fit right there. The light would be perfect." Our sectional. Not yours, not someday, not if. Darren gave a low laugh, nervous and careless at the same time. "Kelsey," he said, but there was no warning in it. She answered, "What? I'm just looking." I kept my eyes on the strawberries. One red half, then another, falling into the blue glass bowl Paul had bought me at a church sale years before. Then Darren said it. "Don't worry, Mum won't fight us. She just needs to feel like it was her idea." The knife stopped in my hand. For a second, all I heard was the coffee maker clicking off. Lily went quiet in the dining room. I could have walked in there. I could have asked him what he meant. I could have made everyone uncomfortable. Instead, I set the knife down, wiped my hands on a dish towel, and poured 4 cups of coffee. But that was not the moment I decided to sell. That came later, when I saw what my son had already promised. What Darren had promised would not have hurt so badly if that condo had only been walls and windows. But it was never just that to me. My name is Marian Ellis. I was 72 years old that spring, retired from the elementary school office, where I had spent nearly 30 years answering phones, finding lost lunchboxes, calming worried mothers, and keeping track of children who forgot where they were supposed to be. I had one son, one granddaughter, and one husband buried under a maple tree at Riverside Memorial, with my name already carved beside his. Paul and I were married 47 years. We did not begin with much. Our first apartment had pipes that knocked all winter, and a kitchen so narrow, Paul used to say we could cook dinner and wash dishes without moving our feet. Later came the little ranch house where we raised Darren. The roof leaked twice. The furnace quit one January. I clipped coupons, packed lunches, stretched chicken into 3 meals, and told myself comfort could wait. Paul said the same thing, only quieter. He worked maintenance at the county building, and he could fix almost anything with a toolbox and patience. Every Friday, he put a little money away. Not much. Sometimes $20, sometimes less. He called it our someday fund. When Darren was grown and Paul's knees started bothering him, we finally used that fund for the condo by the lake. It had an elevator from the garage, wide hallways, good light in the afternoon, and a balcony just big enough for 2 chairs and a small table. The day we signed the papers, Paul stood in the living room with his hands in his pockets, looking out at the water like he had built the lake himself. "This place is for your peace," he told me, "not anybody else's convenience." At the time, I laughed and told him not to be dramatic. After he died, I understood. That condo was where I learned to sleep alone, where I stopped setting out 2 coffee mugs, where I folded his sweaters one last time and still kept his reading chair by the balcony door because moving it felt too final. To Darren and Kelsey, it may have looked like square footage, a good view, and a better school district. To me, it was the last promise Paul ever kept. That was why I noticed when their concerns started sounding less like love and more like planning. It did not happen all at once. If it had, maybe I would have called it what it was sooner. At first, Darren came by with small questions. He would glance at the hallway light and ask if I was still changing bulbs myself. He would look toward the balcony and say the railing seemed low, though it had passed every inspection when we bought the place. He asked if the elevator ever went out. He asked if the maintenance fees were getting hard to keep up with. He asked whether I had updated my emergency contacts. He said all of it gently. That was the trouble. Cruelty is easier to recognize when it comes with a raised voice. It is harder when it wears your son's face and uses the word worried. "I just don't want you overwhelmed, Mum," he told me one afternoon, standing in my kitchen with his hands around a mug of coffee he had not thanked me for making. "I'm not overwhelmed," I said. "I know," he answered too quickly, "but you might be someday." Kelsey was smoother about it. She never said, "We want your condo." Not then. She would leave a glossy brochure on the corner of my kitchen table, pretending she had forgotten it. "Those senior villas are actually beautiful," she said once, tapping one with her fingernail. "They have activities, people your age, less upkeep." "I have activities," I said. "I watered my fern this morning and argued with the crossword." She smiled like I had made a joke that proved her point. Later, I learned their rent had gone up again. Darren had taken a pay cut after changing jobs, and Kelsey's mother had been making little comments about how long they planned to keep renting. I can understand pressure. I have lived under plenty of it. But pressure does not give you permission to start counting someone else's rooms. Then came the comments about space. "You barely use the second bedroom." "That dining table is too big for one person." "This view is wasted if nobody comes over." One Sunday, while Lily was helping me dry plates, Kelsey stood in the living room and looked around like she was viewing a house online. "This place really should be used by a family," she said. Lily's hands stopped moving on the dish towel. Darren heard it. I know he did, because his shoulders tightened. But he said nothing. That silence hurt more than Kelsey's sentence. After that, I began noticing Darren's words. He stopped saying, "Your condo," and started saying, "the condo." He asked where I kept insurance papers, whether I had updated my will, whether my paperwork was simple. They thought I did not notice the words changing. But women my age notice when love starts sounding like paperwork. And Paul, God bless him, had left me a folder for exactly that kind of day. Paul had always been a man who believed worry should be met with a screwdriver, a list, or a signed paper. When his diagnosis came, he did not fall apart in front of me. He got quieter, more careful. He started labeling things. The furnace manual went into one drawer, warranty papers into another, bank statements into a file box with tabs so neat they made my heart ache. And then there was the blue folder. It was an ordinary folder from the office supply store, the kind with 2 pockets and a little metal fastener in the middle. Paul wrote on the front in black marker, "For Marian, important." I hated that folder at first. Not because of what was inside it, but because of what it meant. It meant Paul was preparing to leave me. It meant he was thinking about days when I would have to sit at that kitchen table without him and make decisions he used to help me carry. Inside, he placed the condo deed, the insurance policy, the property tax records, a list of account numbers, and the business card of an estate attorney named Ellen Whitmore. There were copies of everything, because Paul believed one copy was never enough. He even paperclipped a spare key envelope to the back pocket, though he had written in small letters across it. "Use wisely, not out of guilt." For months after his funeral, I could not open that folder without feeling like I was hearing his voice from another room. So I kept it in the bottom drawer of the hutch, under the table linens we used on Thanksgiving. Every now and then, I would touch the drawer handle and tell myself I should review things. Then I would make tea instead. But after Kelsey said my home should be used by a family, and after Darren began asking about my paperwork, like he was checking weather before a trip, I thought about that blue folder more and more. One evening, I opened the drawer. The folder was still there. Inside the front pocket was a note I had read only once before. Paul's handwriting leaned slightly to the right, like it always had. "Marian, don't let guilt sign your name." I sat there for a long time with that note in my hand. And the next time Kelsey came over, she made it much harder for me to pretend I had misunderstood. It was a Saturday afternoon, the kind with thin winter light coming through the balcony doors. I had made chicken salad sandwiches because Darren used to like them with extra celery. And Lily had asked if I still had the little glass plates with flowers around the edge. I did. Of course I did. Grandmothers keep those things. Kelsey arrived wearing a cream coat and carrying a tote bag large enough for a weekend trip. She kissed the air near my cheek and said, "This place always smells like old furniture polish." Darren gave a small laugh, as if that softened it. I told her lunch was almost ready. While I carried plates from the kitchen, Kelsey wandered into the living room. At first, I thought she was just looking out at the lake. Then I heard that sharp little click again. The tape measure. She pulled it from one end of the wall to the other, right beneath the framed photograph of Paul and me on our 35th anniversary. Then she moved toward the corner where Paul's reading chair sat. That chair was faded brown leather, cracked along one arm, where his elbow had rested for years. It was not stylish. It did not match anything Kelsey would have chosen. But Paul had read every newspaper in that chair. He had held Lily there when she was a baby. He had fallen asleep there during ball games with his glasses sliding down his nose. Kelsey tapped the wall behind it with her fingernail. "If this chair was gone," she said, "we could put built-ins here, maybe paint the room a warm white. It would brighten everything." I stood there with a plate in each hand. Lily looked down at the napkins she was folding. Darren cleared his throat. "Kels, maybe not right now." But he did not say, "This is Mom's home." He did not say, "That is Dad's chair." He did not say, "Put the tape measure away." Kelsey only smiled and rolled the tape back in. "I'm just thinking ahead," she said. There it was again. Ahead. as if I was not standing in the present, breathing, remembering, owning. I set the plates on the table carefully, because dropping them would have given everyone a reason to talk about my age, instead of their behavior. If it had only been the tape measure, I might have swallowed the hurt. But then I noticed the spare key was gone. It had always hung on a small brass hook inside the pantry door, tucked behind a calendar from the pharmacy. Paul had put it there years earlier, after I locked myself out carrying groceries. Darren knew about it, because I had told him once, back when knowing things about my life still felt like trust. After they left that afternoon, I stood in the pantry with the door open and stared at the empty hook. For a minute, I tried to explain it away. Maybe I had moved it. Maybe I had given it to Darren during a storm and forgotten. Maybe Paul had put it somewhere else before he died, though I knew that was nonsense the moment I thought it. Older mothers are very good at making excuses for their children. We call it understanding. Sometimes it is only fear wearing a nicer dress. I closed the pantry door and went to the kitchen table. The plates were still stacked by the sink. One of Lily's folded napkins sat beside my coffee cup, neat as a little envelope. Paul's photograph was on the windowsill, the one where he was holding a fishing pole and squinting into the sun. I looked at that picture and finally let myself cry. Not loud, not the kind of crying that shakes the walls. Just quiet tears that came because I was tired of pretending not to understand. I thought about Darren at 28, when his first business failed and Paul and I quietly paid 3 months of his mortgage so he would not lose the house. I thought about the envelopes of grocery money. I slipped into his glove compartment after Lily was born. I thought about school pickups, dentist appointments, birthday cakes, and the winter. I drove across town every afternoon because Kelsey said daycare was too expensive. I never kept a scorecard. That was the difference between love and alone. But sitting there that night, I understood that my kindness had been counted as availability. My silence had been counted as agreement. My home had been counted as something waiting for them. I wiped my face with a paper towel because the good napkins were still damp from lunch. Then I opened the hutch drawer and took out Paul's blue folder. The note was still inside. Don't let guilt sign your name. That was when I stopped waiting for my son to choose me. By Monday morning, I started choosing myself. I did not do it dramatically. I did not slam doors or write long messages. I did not call Darren to accuse him of anything. I made oatmeal, washed the bowl, put on a navy cardigan, and sat at the kitchen table with Paul's blue folder open in front of me. My hands shook a little when I dialed the number on Ellen Whitmore's business card. Ellen had been Paul's attorney years before, when we bought the condo and updated our wills after Lily was born. I remembered her as a calm woman with silver glasses and a way of explaining legal things without making you feel foolish. When her receptionist answered, I almost hung up. Then I looked at Paul's note again. So I said, "This is Marian Ellis. My husband was Paul Ellis. I need to review my property documents." 2 days later, I walked into Ellen's office with the blue folder tucked under my arm. The waiting room smelled faintly of lemon polish and printer paper. There was a little dish of wrapped peppermints on the table. I took one and held it in my palm the whole time, not because I wanted candy, but because I needed something small to hold on to. Ellen greeted me gently. "Mrs. Ellis," she said, "I'm sorry we're meeting under worry." That nearly undid me, because worry was exactly the word. In her office, I placed Paul's folder on the desk. She opened the deed first. I watched her read it carefully, line by line, the way Paul would have wanted. Then she looked up at me. "The condo is solely in your name," she said. "Your son has no ownership interest." I nodded, but I must have looked more frightened than relieved, because she leaned forward and added, "Mrs. Ellis, no one can promise property they do not own." Something inside me settled when she said that. Not happiness, not victory, just steadiness. We reviewed my will. We talked about my trust. We discussed emergency contacts, spare keys, account access, and what documents should be kept somewhere safer than a hutch drawer under Thanksgiving linens. Ellen explained what could be updated that week, what needed signatures, what needed notarizing, and what would take a little longer to file properly. There was no magic to it, no movie moment, just forms, dates, copies, and a woman finally asking the questions she had been afraid to ask. Before I left, Ellen made copies of the deed and gave me a plain envelope with her card inside. I left that office with the same purse I had carried in. But inside it, I had something my son never expected me to have. Proof. Proof is a quiet thing when you first carry it. It does not make noise in your purse. It does not announce itself at the dinner table. It does not change the face you show the grocery clerk or the woman who asks how your day is going at the pharmacy. But it changes how you stand. Over the next 10 days, I did the small things Ellen told me to do. I took the original deed and Paul's blue folder to a safe deposit box at the bank. I made a copy for the fireproof lockbox in my bedroom closet. I spoke to the building manager, Mr. Alvarez, and asked him to remove Darren's name from the informal emergency key list. He looked surprised, but he did not pry. "Of course, Mrs. Ellis," he said. "I'll update it today." I also asked a locksmith to rekey the door. When he handed me the new keys, I put one on my ring and one in the lockbox. No hidden spare, no hook behind the pantry calendar. If the old key had simply been misplaced, then no harm was done. If someone had taken it, then the harm stopped there. That simple decision felt like a door closing softly. I also stopped answering my phone every time it rang. That may not sound like much, but for mothers, especially older mothers, not answering can feel like breaking a law nobody wrote down. Darren had grown used to reaching me whenever he wanted. If I was in the shower, I called back. If I was in bed, I answered. If I was tired, I pretended not to be. That week, I let the phone ring. The first message came from Kelsey. "Just checking in. You seemed a little off Sunday. Hope you're not upset." Not sorry. Not, did we hurt you? Just hope you're not upset, as if my feelings were a small inconvenience she hoped would clear up by itself. Then Darren called. I waited until after supper to call him back. "Mum," he said, with that careful voice people use when they are trying to sound patient, "why are you being so hard to reach?" "I had errands," I said. "What kind of errands?" "The kind a person handles for herself." There was a pause. A few days later, he stopped by and went straight to the pantry like he had a right to it. I watched him open the door and look at the empty brass hook. He turned around slowly. "Where's the spare key?" "In a safer place." His jaw tightened. "Mom, why are you acting secretive?" I folded the dish towel in my hands. "I'm acting responsible." He stared at me then, and I could see it clearly. He knew the door felt different. He just did not know yet that I had found the message that proved why. It happened 2 days after he asked about the spare key. Darren came over after work to look at my printer. I had mentioned on the phone that it kept flashing an orange light, and before I could say I would call the office supply store, he said, "I'll stop by." You shouldn't have to deal with that stuff. There was a time when that sentence would have warmed me. That evening, it only made me careful. He stood in the little alcove off my kitchen, bending over the printer with his sleeves rolled up. I made tea, because habits do not disappear just because trust does. His phone was on the counter beside him, face up, next to the sugar bowl Paul had always said was too fancy for everyday use. I was reaching for 2 mugs when the screen lit. I did not pick it up. I did not touch it. But the words were large enough for me to see. "Kelsey, did you get her to agree yet? I already told my mother we'll be in the condo by June." My hand froze on the mug handle. Darren glanced toward the phone, then toward me. I turned slightly, pretending to check the kettle. He picked up the phone and typed quickly, his thumbs moving like he was swatting away a fly. A second later, he set it back down. The screen lit again, with his own message still visible at the bottom. Almost. She just needs to feel like it was her idea. There it was. Not a misunderstanding, not worry, not a daughter-in-law daydreaming out loud. A plan. My son had not been asking questions because he cared whether I felt safe. He had been measuring how close I was to surrender. I poured the tea. My hand shook enough that a little spilled into the saucer, but Darren did not notice. He was too busy feeling clever about fixing the printer. "All set," he said. "You just had the paper loaded wrong." I smiled faintly. "Thank you." He kissed my cheek before he left, and I stood very still until the door clicked shut behind him. Then I sat at the kitchen table and wrote down the date, the time, and the exact words I had seen. I did not know yet what I could use or what I could not. I only knew that I needed to stop trusting memory alone. I folded that paper and placed it inside Paul's blue folder. That was the night my doubt ended. The next person I called was not my son. It was a realtor. Not the one whose mail had started showing up in odd ways. Not the one Kelsey had mentioned once, too casually, while looking out my balcony doors. I called Ellen first and asked if she knew someone honest, someone patient, someone who would not talk over an older woman just because her hair was grey. Ellen gave me the name of a woman named Carol Bennett. Carol came the following Thursday afternoon. She wore a dark green coat, carried a leather folder, and asked before she sat down at my kitchen table. I liked that right away. People who ask before taking a seat usually understand more than property value. "Mrs. Ellis," she said, "before we talk numbers, I want to ask you something plainly. Is anyone pressuring you to sell?" The question made my throat tighten. I looked toward Paul's chair by the balcony door. The sun was resting on one arm of it, showing every crack in the old leather. "No," I said carefully. "People have been pressuring me to give up control. That is not the same thing." Carol waited. "I am not selling because they want me out," I told her. "I am considering selling because I no longer want to live in a place where my own son has started counting the rooms before I am finished living in them." She nodded, not with pity, but with respect. That mattered to me. We walked through the condo together. She looked at the balcony, the kitchen, the second bedroom, the view of the water. She told me what repairs might help, what was unnecessary, what the market looked like, and how long things might take. She did not promise miracles. She did not say it would sell overnight. She explained the listing agreement page by page and told me I could take as much time as I needed. That evening, I sat alone with the papers spread across the table. Paul's blue folder was beside them. His note was on top. "Don't let guilt sign your name." I read every line. Then I read them again. The next morning, I signed. Not because Darren had pushed me. Because he had shown me what staying would cost. Carol asked when I wanted the sign placed outside. I looked at the calendar. Sunday would have been too dramatic. Monday would have felt like hiding. So I chose Wednesday morning, when the building was quiet and the lake usually held a little fog. What Darren didn't know was that the next signature was not his to ask for. They thought the sign would mean I had lost. They did not know I had signed for it myself. That was why Darren looked so angry when he followed me inside that morning. Anger is easier than fear, and I could see fear sitting underneath his voice like a second person in the room. Kelsey came in behind him, her purse tight under one arm, her eyes moving over my walls as if she were already watching them disappear from her plans. I closed the door softly. I did not offer coffee. Some moments are not helped by politeness. Darren stood in the middle of my living room and pointed toward the window, where the sign was still visible beyond the walkway. "Mom, you can't just sell the family condo without talking to us." "The family condo?" There it was, finally said out loud. I walked past him to the kitchen table and placed Paul's blue folder in the center. My hands were steady. I remember noticing that. After all those nights of shaking hands and tired eyes, they were steady when it mattered. This was never the family condo, I said. It was my home. Kelsey let out a small breath. Marian, nobody is trying to take anything from you. We were only worried. This place is too much for one person. I opened the folder and took out the deed. Then you should have asked one person, I said. Me. Darren glanced at the paper, but did not reach for it. The deed is in my name only, I told him. Your father made sure of that. You have no ownership, no authority, and no right to promise this place to anyone. His face changed then. Not completely. Just enough for me to know he understood the first door had closed. I took out the next papers. My trust has been updated. My care comes first. Lily's education has been provided for in a way no one else can touch. Your name has been removed from informal access to my building key and my documents. Kelsey's cheeks coloured. That seems extreme. So did measuring the wall behind your father-in-law's chair. She looked away. Darren rubbed his forehead. Mom, Kelsey was just thinking ahead. You're making this sound worse than it was. I reached into the folder and unfolded the paper where I had written the date, the time, and the words I had seen on his phone. I had also printed the messages Ellen told me I could keep for my own records. I read them once, quietly. Did you get her to agree yet? I already told my mother we'll be in the condo by June. Then his reply. Almost. She just needs to feel like it was her idea. No one spoke. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a car door shut. Kelsey stared at the table, and Darren looked at me like he was seeing someone older than his mother and stronger than he had planned for. Finally, I placed Paul's note on top of everything. Don't let guilt sign your name. Darren's eyes went to his father's handwriting. That was the first time. He stopped looking at the papers like they were obstacles. He looked at them like they were Paul standing in the room with us. His mouth opened once, then closed. I knew that look. I had seen it when he was a boy and had broken something important, hoping no one would notice. Dad wrote that? He asked. Yes, I said. Because he knew me. He knew I might confuse guilt with love if he was not here to remind me. Darren looked down. For one small moment, I saw shame reach him before pride pushed it away. Mom, he said quietly, I didn't think it would go this far. No, I said. You thought I wouldn't. Kelsey folded her arms. We were trying to plan for the future. I looked at her then. Concern stops being love when it comes with a tape measure. That was when Darren sat down. He did it slowly, like his knees had remembered something his pride had forgotten. For a moment, he looked almost young to me, not innocent, just young. The same boy who used to come home with grass stains on his jeans and expect me to know where every lost thing belonged. But he was not a boy anymore. He was a grown man who had let his wife measure my living room while I served lunch. A grown man who had promised away a home his father bought to protect me. Kelsey was the first one to speak. So what are we supposed to do now? She asked. Not, I'm sorry. Not, we hurt you. Not even, we were wrong. Just what are we supposed to do now? That told me more than any apology would have. You will do what other families do, I said. You will live in a home that belongs to you. Darren stared at the folder. Mom, I didn't mean for it to sound like that. I believe you, I said. I don't think you meant for me to hear it. His face tightened, but he had no answer. They left without shouting. Kelsey walked ahead of him, stiff-backed and silent. Darren paused at the door like he wanted me to stop him, comfort him, make the moment easier the way I always had. I did not. That evening, my phone rang 3 times. Darren again. Then Kelsey. I let each call go to voicemail. Not because I stopped loving him in one afternoon, but because I had finally learned that love did not require me to answer every demand. The next day, Lily called. Her voice was small. "Grandma?" "Hi, sweetheart." There was a pause long enough for me to hear her breathing. "Are you moving because you want to?" she asked. "Or did they make you feel like you had to leave?" That question nearly broke me. I sat down in Paul's chair and looked out at the lake. "I am moving because I choose to," I told her gently. "But I had to choose after I learned what people were planning without me." She cried then, quietly. "I saw Mum measuring the wall," she said. "I should have said something." "Oh, honey," I said, "you are a child. It was never your job to protect me from grown people." She sniffed. "I don't want you to think I wanted your home." "I know," I said, "and that is why I can still open my door to you." And I understood that what Darren and Kelsey had lost was not just a condo. They had lost the right to be trusted with my peace. Once I understood that, the rest became quieter than people might imagine. There were no dramatic scenes in the hallway, no police cars, no screaming in front of neighbors. Just appointments, signatures, boxes, and the slow work of choosing what deserved to come with me. The condo did not sell overnight. Carol made sure I understood that from the beginning. There were photographs to take, small repairs to approve, showings to schedule, and papers to read with my glasses low on my nose. I refused to rush. That mattered to me. I had been pushed in my own home long enough. I would not let even freedom hurry me. The sale took weeks. During that time, I watched the lake change from grey to silver to blue, depending on the weather. On one of my last mornings there, I sat on the balcony with coffee and said goodbye without making a ceremony of it. Some goodbyes are too private for speeches. Ellen helped me place the proceeds into the trust we had discussed. My care came first. Housing, medical needs, daily comfort, the ordinary dignity of not having to ask anyone for grocery money or permission. After that, a portion was set aside for Lily's education. Not money handed to Darren, not money Kelsey could borrow against. It would be paid directly for school expenses when the time came. Another portion became something I had not expected at first. A small scholarship in Paul's name for older women going back to school. Paul would have liked that. He believed a woman should always have a way to stand on her own feet, even if her knees hurt a little. When I found the garden apartment, I knew almost right away. It was smaller than the condo. No lakeview, no balcony high enough to catch the morning fog. But it had a little patio with enough sun for herbs, a bedroom with good light, and a kitchen window that looked out toward a row of maple trees. The building manager called me Mrs. Ellis and asked where I wanted the mailbox key sent. That small respect settled something in me. I did not take everything. I sold the dining table because it had become too large for my life. I donated the wall unit Kelsey had wanted removed. I gave away dishes I had kept, only because they belonged to a version of myself who hosted people who no longer arrived with love. But I kept Paul's reading chair. The movers placed it by the new window on a Tuesday afternoon. I stood there after they left, one hand resting on the cracked leather arm, and for the first time in months, my chest did not feel tight. I placed Paul's blue folder in the top drawer of my new desk. I did not take everything with me. Only what still knew how to love me back. That is what I carried into the life I chose next. Not everything healed at once. Stories like mine rarely end with everyone sitting around a table, crying into napkins and saying all the right things. Darren still calls. Sometimes, I answer. Sometimes, I let the phone rest on the little table beside Paul's chair until I feel steady enough to hear his voice. I still love my son. A mother does not stop loving because she finally sees clearly. But love is not the same as access. Love is not a spare key. Love is not a signature waiting at the bottom of a page someone else wrote. Kelsey has not apologized. Not really. She sent one message that said, "We never meant to make you feel uncomfortable." I read it twice, then put the phone down. Uncomfortable was the wrong word. I had been useful. Then inconvenient. Then movable. But not anymore. Lily visits on Saturdays when she can. She brings iced tea from the little cafe near her school, and we water the rosemary together on my patio. Sometimes she asks about her grandfather. Sometimes I tell her how he used to burn toast and blame the toaster. Sometimes we sit quietly, and that is enough. One afternoon, she looked at the rosemary and said, "It's doing better here." I smiled. So am I. I made sure her future was protected, but I also made sure her parents could not use her as a doorway back into my decisions. By my front door, there is a small wooden hook. One key hangs there. Just one. No hidden spare behind a calendar. No envelope marked emergency. No quiet permission, waiting for someone who thought love meant control. Some people will call that cold. I call it peace. If you have ever had to protect your heart from someone you still loved, then you understand. Being quiet was never the same as giving permission.